Okay.
Welcome, Charles.
Thank you. Thank you.
Charles McPherson, jazz legend. It's so great to have you.
Well, thank you. Good to be here.
Charles, I wanted to start this conversation with asking you to talk maybe a little bit about your childhood
Mhm.
and your personal stories of what it's like to be black,
Mhm.
growing up as black
Mhm.
in America.
Well, I grew up in my early years were in Joplin, Missouri, which is south central United States, and not real south, but getting there. So as a youngster, I accepted that kind of treatment because I didn't know any better. I thought this was I mean, it was the way it was. And I can remember traveling on trains with my parents and with my mother in particular, and having to sit in certain cars of the train, not being able to sit in any car or any seat you wanted to. There were certain cars on a railroad train that were for African Americans. So I remember that because I remember traveling from Joplin, Missouri to Detroit, Michigan, when I was, 6, 7 years old. And I remember having to do that. I didn't know enough to be outraged by that because I was too young, and that was just the way it was. And my mother, I would imagine that a lot of African Americans of that day just kind of accepted that reality. They went to the we went to segregated movie houses. When I went to the movie as a kid, um, white people would be sitting in one part of the theater, and brown people would be sitting in another part of the theater. Um, and you accept that as a norm, especially when you are a kid, because you come into a world that is already behaving in that manner in terms of color. One of the things I remember, this is sort of interesting. Uh, when I was a kid, and I would hear people use terms like black and white describing African Americans, I was always befuddled by just this fact. When I would look at my crayons, it would be, and I would take the brown crayon and mark on a piece of paper, and then look at my brown, it would be brown. So that was one of the first things that I didn't understand about race or classification of race. It's like, well, I know there is black because here's a black crayon, but I'm really brown. So why are they calling me black? I mean, and see, I didn't understand that. What kid does understand that? You know, that's just kind of a side issue. But nevertheless, the way that we were treated was considered like some kind of norm, and that was it. Now,
Did you
after
ever have conversations with your parents about that?
not really, because they are accepting it. Like everybody's accepting it. White people are accepting this kind of behavior as this is just the way it is. And so, and everybody else is kind of accepting that as well. So my parents, the only thing that I would be told would be, don't say that, or don't act this way because this might be that you would be treated differently. So after a while you learn that you are treated different as you get older. You
And what
learn,
were those ways you were not supposed to act?
well, let me see, you weren't supposed to, okay, let's say righteous indignation. Now that's a quality every human being has, to be indignant, and to rightly so, because in a particular instance you are right. Well, then you learn early on that the level of righteous indignation is not really uh, enjoyed by you as an African American. Your level of being indignant is only this much, that you might be allowed. This much is totally out of the question. So we were told early on to not totally express yourself. You know, we were told in terms of authority, and most people in those days of authority would be white people. Now, I must say that generation of people, black or white, had this much more reverence for authority, you know, no matter what your raciality was, because that's just the way it was. An adult black person would get uh, a certain amount of respect from us kids being black, because that's just the way it was for white people and black people. And a white person that's an adult, you're not only going to get this much, but this much, you know. And so you learn that early on, that things aren't quite the same for you. But you accept it because you accept it as some kind of norm. You've never experienced anything else but that. So why wouldn't that be a norm? And only as you get older, I'm talking about a young kid's response to things. As you get older and you get more of a sense of self, then you know more about how the level of unfairness things are, because you're cognizant of that. You are aware of that, but you still have to behave a certain way because that's the way the things are, the way it is. And you are a minority. You're not a majority, even in terms of numbers. I mean, you know, in terms of numbers, you are a minority. So you only have so much say so, no matter what the dynamic is, and you learn that. And
Are there any personal stories you're willing to share about some of the
well,
encounters of not being like fairly treated
um,
at that time?
yes, and it started to maybe I became more of aware of the discrepancy of just how things were different as I got older and moved to Detroit, which is a northern city, you know, and became a musician. I started playing music at around 12 years old, 12, 13 years old. By the time I got 14 to 15, by the time I got 15, then I started really being interested in jazz music and learning and doing everything I could to learn how to play that kind of music. And so now this puts me in the company of other young people that are enamored of this music as well, and some of whom are white. Okay. Now, this is when another dynamic became obvious and I became aware, and there are certain things that I learned. Um, we would be in a band to get, you know, I'm a saxophone player. There would be a drummer who was white. We were in the same band. We were in love with the same kind of music, jazz music, and a particular genre of jazz music, which in those days was called bebop or and modern jazz or progressive jazz. It was a
And
whole
that's 50s we're talking about, right?
yeah, we're talking
50s
about
or
the 50s now, early
right,
50s.
yeah.
So us musicians that were 15, 16, 17, we were playing music at that time. We were in the last year or 2 years of high school, and we were, you know, we played in bands, and sometimes a band would be composed of people that were black and white, you know. Sometimes girls would be in a band. It would be a girl bass player. So it would be it was a mixed thing, especially with this kind of music. This particular kind of music was, you know, there were black people and white people that played this, that were attracted to this music. And so this is when I realized that then I experienced, and even the white people experienced a different kind of of a certain kind of racism. We would be in the car on our way to a gig. We might be playing a high school prom gig, or it was a gig someplace. A cop car would roll up. In those days, they were called the Big Four. This was in Detroit in the 50s. So it would be an unmarked police car with four policemen in it, plainclothes policemen. And these were detectives. Um, they would pull up beside us, maybe at a stop light or something, and look in the car and see the mixed raciality inside the car. Well, this automatically sent off a red flag. That was an automatic stoppage. So they'd see that, and then their curiosity would be, what are these black and white people doing in the same car? So that would mean they'd pull us over and ask us to get out of the car and start questioning us. Who are you? Where are you? Where are you going? Why are you? Well, then we'd say, we are musicians and we're on our way to a gig. This would satisfy their curiosity to a point, because they knew that, oh, well, these musicians are apt to be with each other that are different colors. They didn't like that. They didn't understand it. They didn't want to understand it, but they knew that such a thing existed. So now the next kind of questioning went on. Okay, so they must have drugs. And so the search would be on. We knew enough not to have we were kids, we weren't doing anything anyway, but we certainly knew not to have anything on us, and we would not. So the search for them would come up empty. And this would actually make them a little irritated because they wanted something. And then quite often they would look at one of the white people in the car and say, what are you doing with him? Or what are you doing with them? And it's like, well, we play music. And then they just have this blank look on their face, like, oh, okay, get out of here. And that would be the end of it. But this would happen over and over and over and over again. This is early 50s in Detroit. Just young musicians in love with music, wanting to play, not giving a damn about black, white, green, yellow, gender, or any of it. And this was just considered not really liked. And so that was, I experienced that as a young kid. Now, as I learned to play better and became a professional, I moved to New York. And now this was the early 60s, the beginning of civil rights, Vietnam War protests. And so there was a lot of flux going on in American society. There was civil rights, there were voting rights, there were people that were against the war, black and white, that did not like the war. And so you had all of this, this confluence of things happening at the same time. And New York was a very interesting place in the 60s, and especially for a young person, because all these things were going on. And so it was kind of interesting to be a young person growing up in New York. I started working with Charlie Mingus, great jazz bassist, who was very political. Mingus was, besides being pretty much a near genius musically and very prolific as a composer and very talented man, was also very intelligent, was very politically aware and very vocal about his views, and definitely very vocal about injustices. So a lot of the music that we played with Mingus as the band leader was protest music, because he wrote music and composed music that reflected the turmoil of the time. Not only the war, but also racial injustice, civil rights, voting rights, Southern governors that were against integration, that were putting dogs on people and water holes. There were certain governors that were very famous. Faubus, the governor Faubus of Arkansas, Governor George Wallace of somewhere, Alabama or Georgia, I forget. These were staunch segregationists who just would not allow for schools to be desegregated, didn't want black people to vote. And this mostly was in the South. However, the racial divide was all over the United States. And so in New York, and being a musician and I started traveling, all around the world. Now I'm a young man that's not only in New York, in the hub of things, but I'm also going to France. I'm also going to Italy. I'm also going to Yugoslavia. I'm also going to Germany. I'm starting to be a world traveler, and it's a certain amount of sophistication
How did
into
you
that.
see the difference between the way you were treated in the US versus the way you were treated in Europe?
Well, there was a different kind of treatment, and I was aware of that. Now, that's not to say there's not racism in Europe either, because we both know that there is. But it was a different kind of racism, and I don't know if the level of the intensity was as much. And there was just a little bit of a different slant, and enough so that for people like me, we would consider it a lot more tolerable and a lot more welcoming. When we went to France or Italy, um, we were musicians and celebrities, but how we were treated, uh, and these were white people, of course. This is Europe. We were not treated as harshly and as austerely and as badly as we would be treated in America, in the South. And we were aware of that. So for a young person to know that every place is not like America, even though it's not perfect either in France or Italy or Germany, we know that. But it's something a little bit different about it, and just a little bit less harsh and less mean. And that wasn't lost on people like me. We knew that. Um, However, things were changing. And I'm glad I was kind of a part of that and a witness that. Uh, as by the time I started playing, things had changed enough so that we could go to the hotels. We weren't barred from certain hotels, like the movie Green Book, sort of,
The
that
Green Book,
movie.
yes.
Yes, well, see that book and that era and that musician that book is kind of about, and that the life of a musician during that period was a little earlier than my time. And so as I got older and where I was a professional myself and old enough to travel, then things had changed enough so that a green book wasn't necessary, pretty much, you know, to a greater extent. It wasn't, let's put it that way. But those were my early beginnings. And, I've watched the evolution of things being pretty bad, um, to a little better in certain ways up until now, you know. I remember this. This is interesting. My father was a World War II veteran. He was in the Pacific. He was a Navy. He was a sailor. He was a Navy guy. And I can remember stories that my father would tell me that when they weren't fighting or they were on a break, they would have uh, talent. They would have shows. There was an organization called the USO. People like Bob Hope would bring movie stars and certain famous people and do shows for the servicemen. This is in World War II. Bob Hope would bring people like, Marilyn Monroe or some famous movie star. They would entertain all the Navy people, the Army, and this would happen. And my father told me that there would be situations where they would be in this big room and people like Bob Hope or somebody would be bringing these entertainers. Sometimes it would be black entertainers like Lena Horne or Nat King Cole. And he said that when we were looking at that, the German prisoners of war had better seats to see the show than we would.
Gosh.
Now, if you think about what that means, here's the Germans, the United States is at war with these people. The guy that's a German soldier is sitting down with a great seat to see the show, right next to maybe some American guy who he maybe just shot the brother of the guy in the face with a weapon. And he's got a better seat than the black soldiers and servicemen that are fighting the war right next to and for America, white America. And the German prisoner of war has got a better seat to see Lena Horne than he does. He's all the way up in the rafters, hanging, looking behind poles to see. So that in itself speaks volumes. And my father was very much aware of that. And then having to come home, and then after dodging bullets, getting shot, killing other people, to go get a glass of water, and then told he can't get one. That's a hell of a thing if you think about that.
Indeed.
If you're asking people to die for a way of life that you're not even able to enjoy yourself, and you're considered not a good person if you don't go to the war. Think about that. And this is what people had to actually not only think about, but live, be, tolerate, and exist in that kind of in that kind of world in America. So it is what it is. It has gotten a lot better. It's changing, but a lot of things has just gone undercover. There are certain there's systemic racism that still goes on.
Let me ask you this. Which year did you move to San Diego?
I moved to San Diego in 1978 from New York. And I lived in New York almost 20 years.
What prompted the move to San Diego? Why did you choose San Diego?
Well, I moved to San Diego because I'm an only child. And my mother was getting on in age, and I started being concerned. I live in New York. She was living in La Jolla, actually. And I would see her maybe once a year because my work would take me to the West Coast. But I started worrying about how is she getting on as an older person. And I started being concerned about seeing her once a year is not enough. I should see her more often because I'm wondering if she's falling, and not able to get up. How does she live? Because she lived by herself. So I just came out to visit and, kind of be with her for a couple of months and ended up staying in San Diego. And that's how I got.
What was San Diego like in those times compared to New York City, also as it comes to interracial relationships?
Well, it's a much smaller city, for one thing, and it's not as complicated. A lot more easygoing. It's a warm weather climate, all those things. In terms of race, it was no more racist or not racist than New York City. I didn't experience any more or any less, So, and to this day, I would say it's more or less. It is. Things are what it is, but I didn't experience anything in San Diego that was overt, more racist than.
What are some of the things that are still happening in San Diego, or maybe on your travel, that still reminds you that racism is not over?
See, now it has become, as I said before, there is systemic racism. It's not the difference now as opposed to 50, 60 years ago it is not as overt. It's much more subtle. It's much more underneath things. Even though this present political climate, and with this particular president that's in office now, the racial, the racist, everything has, and people who are that feel more emboldened, have been more emboldened, and a lot of what used to be swept under the rug is politically okay to come out and act like and be like and vent and say and do. So it has become to the point now where that every things that used to be underneath are now right up front in your face and you see it. So you can't
Do you
people
see them happening here in
in
San
San
Diego?
Diego and oh, of course, yeah, all over. I mean, definitely, and not only here but all over the world. I mean, you know what I mean? Because this is this is not just it's an American thing for sure. Because you know you had 400 years plus of slavery in this country in America. So flat out, we know it's here and has been here because you had that. Then you had, you know, Jim Crow. You had everything after slavery and Reconstruction. So it is what it is. But it's not just here; it's all over. You know.
But what are some of the things when you refer to overt racism? Can you share some examples?
Well, for instance, just it was an incident in the park a couple of weeks ago with a woman that was angry at a black guy because he told her that her dog wasn't on the leash.
Oh, that was in New York City,
That was
right?
in now. This is New York,
Yes,
not
right,
Alabama, not
right.
Georgia. Okay, this
Yes,
is New York. Supposedly sophisticated people, and so the lady, because her ego, or she did not want to be told or chastised about that.
right.
That was
Yes,
just too much for her ego.
yes.
And you got to admit, it's an ego thing and a race thing, because if a white person had told her the same thing, it would not have irritated her to that level. You see? So this is what I mean by that. So she's irritated to the level that she's going to call the police, knowing that the attitude of the police is going to be a certain way with a black person. So knowing that all she has to do is say black man and I'm threatened, that right away means that the police are going to be there in about 1,000th of a second right away. She knows that and she uses that card. She plays that card, even though this man is not bothering her at all. Now,
I want to go back to this example a little bit later, when also
but
to
that's an
understand
example of
yeah,
overt racism.
that
Yeah.
the nature of it. But are there any like personal encounters
Yeah.
that happened more recently that you can speak of?
I actually have to think for a minute because I've just been fortunate some kind of way in that there's not a lot that has actually happened. So I'd have to actually search for and think about it for a minute. And that which that has happened has been the very overt, sneaky, the very sneaky kind. Um, and but nothing really traumatic that I can think of. You know that would be a traumatized. Um, but for instance, this is something that does happen. You go to say Starbucks, for instance, okay, and you stand in line, and the person waiting on you could be black or white. This is the interesting thing. There could be white people waiting as well to be waited on. This is the subconscious aspect of racism. The person will automatically, quite often, not 100% of the time, but quite often, will look at the white person and ask him, "Can I help you?" And often that happens to the embarrassment of some white people that will be embarrassed by that and actually say, "I'm not next." he is. And then the
Interesting.
person is like, oh, excuse me, you know. And sometimes the person waiting behind the counter is a Black person that will do the same thing. So here's what I mean by the subconscious aspect. You got overt racism, which is just flat out where that a complete a child can know that this is what this is. And then you got the unconscious stuff that people are behaving, not even wanting to be mean, not even know that they are, but it's so much a part of their of reality. They in their people just devalue the worth of this brown person. Even another Black person does it because he's or she is propagandized by the same system since she was 1 year old. So if she's doing it, white people are doing it and Black, so this is what I mean about uh, something that's so much a part of the fabric of American life that it's even on a subconscious level. And every now and then you have things that blow up, like some Black guy getting choked to death for 9 minutes on television with his hands in his pocket and rocking back and forth on the guy's neck, knowing that people are filming him with cameras, and he's still doing it because he knows he's not going to have to pay a price. That's amazing.
Why do you think this is still happening?
Because it's so much a part of the society, and a lot of it becomes a norm and it's accepted. And there's a lot of people, good white people, that just do not know. They don't know to the extent. And one reason why is because it's not happening to them. And so they don't quite see it. But now, since people have cell phones, and there's nothing you can do in today's world outside of your house that's not being seen by somebody and any kind of negative or any kind of incident at all, that everybody and their great grandmother has a cell phone. And when something happens, people are recording it. It's a whole different, because of technology, it's a whole different reality. So some of the things that Black people have said for years, and well-meaning good white people have thought, oh, I don't know if that's right. I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if that's an exaggeration. I don't know. Now they know. Now they know it's not a matter of somebody being paranoid or, oh, they're just overreacting. Oh, I don't know if that's the truth. Oh, I don't know. Can't say that anymore because now you see. And so what's happening is some of the stuff that's being seen is so egregious that any white person, green person, yellow person, purple person is being appalled by that kind of behavior and inhumanity, even to an animal. It's appalling, it's shocking, and it's being seen now, not being take my word for it, it's being seen. And it's
very true.
It's reached critical mass where that is just that now what was overt and, oh, I don't know if I believe that, can no longer claim that anymore. And it's where people, especially young people, white, Black, brown, yellow, purple, any color, are at the point of knowing that this is no, this can't, this is that's the end of that. So it's going to be either change, it's going to be whatever, but that right there can no longer lie about it, can no longer say it doesn't exist. It does exist.
Let me ask you this. If you ever get pulled over by cops,
Yeah.
and especially if they don't recognize you,
Mhm.
do you see any difference in the way you're treated if
Yes,
there's a white cop versus black cop, or in
yeah.
general?
Okay. I must say, because I have to speak from personal experience, I must say that every encounter that I have ever had with a policeman, white or black, and white, since this is the subject, has never evolved or turned into anything negative at all. So I'm not here to lie or to exaggerate. I'm telling you my personal experience for whatever reason. It could be my vibe, it could be the way that I speak, it could be because maybe I'm not construed as a threat. I don't know what it is, but I've never actually had really a negative encounter. However, that's me. That's just my personal uh, situation. But other people, obviously not. And so I've thought about that. And what it is, a lot of times, here's what happens quite often with the police and black people or brown people is that they are not approached the same way and they're not policed the same way. And here again goes this unconscious human stuff. There's something that's in play quite often when a white officer stops a black person or brown, that they are not, the approach is different and they're not treated the same way. And that manifests itself in the behavior of the policeman and also the behavior of the person being stopped. So there's a lot of things that would never escalate into a negative situation if at the beginning the approach was different. So things can de escalate and then evolve into a negative situation. Whereas if the approach was different, it would never had a chance to escalate and evolve into anything. For instance, the latest thing in Georgia is the guy getting shot in his car. All right, I've seen some of the footage of that, of the arrest. There are several ways that that could have not escalated into anything. First of all, the cop could have took his keys and said, "You're too drunk to drive. Park this car over here. Tell somebody to come to pick your car up, pick your keys up at the police station." That would have been it. That's it. Period. How many times has a drunk white teenager been stopped by a cop and dealt with in exactly that manner? Get out of the car. You're too drunk. Park your car over here. Call your mama to tell him pick you up, and I'll got your keys, and then get out of here. That's happened 1,000 times. You can see a million arrests, and that's exactly what happens. Turn that around, make it a brown person, a black person, something as innocent as a tail light being off ends up with a guy getting shot in the back several times running. So I'm saying that the approach quite often is wrong in the first place for it to even de-escalate. So basically what I'm saying is it's not saying all cops are bad or all policemen bad, all black people good. That's not that simple. It's really saying, to me, I'm saying that quite often and more often than not, the white police officers treat brown people differently from the giddy up. Another great example I'll give, and then we can go to the next subject. A few years ago, a young white man went to a black church and killed 9 people, innocent people, old women, children, shot them to death after they inviting him in to sit down and pray. He sits down and prays with them and then shoots them to death and then leaves and runs away. If you could see, you can YouTube it right now. If you could see the footage of the arrest of that young man who did that, that will make my case. Because here's how the arrest was made. The cop approaches the car with the young man in it. They know that it is him. Not is it him? They know it's him. They know he shot 9 people. They know he is armed to the teeth, and they know he is dangerous and probably crazy. Okay, with all of that knowledge, there's other cars waiting by the police car, but the approaching officer goes up delicately to the car, no gun drawn, and asks politely for the guy to get out of the car. Now, the guy doesn't resist. He gets out of the car, and the arrest is made. On the way to the police station, the guy asks for a hamburger, and the cops go get him a hamburger. Okay, let's turn that around. Make this a black guy who went to a white church, shot 9 innocent, beautiful white people that invited him in, killed them all, got out, ran away, and now they're getting stopped. But the police is stopping this man. First of all, no way would a cop approach this car knowing this Negro had killed 9 people that he's armed to the teeth and nuts. Would they get out of the car and have the officer approaching the car without a gun drawn? Totally BS. You cannot look me in the face. Nobody, no cop, I don't care what color, is going to tell me that arrest would have been made the same way. That speaks volumes. I don't need to say anything more. That's it. That tells you, is the policing different? A great majority of time, and most definitely it is. And now you have cell phones and you see it, and there's civil unrest now from everybody, not just people who look like me, white people that are protesting. There's more white people out there enraged than there are people that look like me. Everybody is enraged, and it's time. It's critical max. It's going to have to be some changes, and that's just it. Period.
How do you feel about this protest?
I feel that it's a positive thing. I mean, I think that there are certain things that happen, like, you know, the old proverbial saying, the straw that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I think maybe that's the straw. And so the protest is a natural thing. I don't like for it to evolve into, you know, violence or looting or all that stuff. I mean, it's nothing about that makes me feel good. But I understand the rage, and if I could push a button, I would have none of that. But the protest itself, a peaceful protest, of course, it's absolutely the way it should be. And for the most part, it is that. So, yeah, I'm for it, you know. And so it's everybody else. So it's maybe 3/4 of the people are for that. And you know what? I'll tell you, Daniel, it's even bigger than black. You know, when you really investigate what we're talking about, in America, it turns out to be a black-white thing. But really, what's being talked about is even bigger than that. It's that people all over the planet Earth are tired of power, or the people who represent our power structure misusing people. I don't care if it's done in an all black society, you know, where it's African nations that are treating other nations because of ethnic differences of tribal, where that they're being shot and killed by somebody that looks just like them, you know, or whether we're in Asia and it's dealing with the Chinese thing, or whether it's in the Middle East, and whether it's America. It's to the point now that the world is not going to be able, nobody is going to tolerate mistreatment from people. And you're going to have war, you're going to have protests, you're going to have discontent. And it's just going to be either this planet is actually going to learn how to do it, or either it's just a perpetual state of war, and we're going to end up, everything is going to end up destroying each other. So that's the bigger picture, is oppression is no longer going to be taken or tolerated by a lot of people, no matter what the raciality is, what the dynamic is. That it's starting to be, that's not going to work anymore. And so since specifically we're talking about this country and the racial, the systemic racism, it's just not going to work. That's not going to be able to, the United States it's not going to be able to be sustainable.
But let me ask you this. If we just, for a moment, leave the notion of police brutality towards Black people and like extreme exercise of power. Yeah. Let's talk about kind of this overt racism that you've been talking about. And I think one important issue to talk about is the privilege, as a issue of white privilege.
Okay.
How do you see the white privilege? And what do you think are issues with white privilege we might not be getting or might not be understanding?
Well, the thing about, okay, when you say white privilege, here's what the privilege is, that they are privileged, they are being treated in a privileged way, or things are easier for them. That's without a doubt. But also there's a negative to that, is that they are not experiencing reality as it really is. And they are able to enjoy the luxury of that because the object of them being oppressed, they're not really being, they don't feel that same kind of pressure. So, and they're just accustomed to not even thinking about that they are privileged. So it's the unawareness of reality, that say white people, with white privilege, they have that. Most people, they can be really nice people. They don't have to be evil people at all. They can just not know or not even think about it, because it's not, they don't have to think about it. You know what I'm saying? And so because they don't have to think about it, they don't. And they just assume that that's the way it should be. And that's the way it is. That's the norm. So because they don't know what they don't know what it is to actually be. They're basically spoiled. They're spoiled and don't know. How does somebody know they're spoiled and don't know it? Is for them to experience life not being spoiled for a year or 6 months. And then you see, or to just open your eyes and see. So yes, that definitely exists.
Considering it's hard to experience living without a privilege in a society like this.
On the same level of privilege.
What I'm trying to say is that better to understand this privilege, because a lot of people don't even realize they have this privilege, right?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Ignorance of not even knowing.
I mean, part of this is explaining to them what this privilege is, like other people who don't have the same privilege, what they have to go through.
Yeah,
that's what we're trying to get to, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to hear more of those stories about what it's like when you don't have a privilege, how life can be very different, much harder.
Yeah, right. And that's a very easy fix. It's so simple that it's elusive. That the answer to the problem, that to even explain to anybody who is so ingrained with this privilege, is to say this to them. If the shoe were on the other foot, how would you like this to happen to you? And right away, you don't have to be a nuclear physicist. Right away, anybody with an ounce of intellect or an ounce of justice and fairness is going to say, oh, no, that's right. So all you have to do is turn it around. And then you realize that that you don't have to, that you wouldn't be able to be or even have the feeling of privilege if you were very much aware that this could be you. There's a very famous poem written and concerning about people of privilege are because a certain group of people in Europe weren't threatened by the Nazis. I wish I knew the name of the poem, but it's a very famous poem. And Mingus used to recite this poem on the bandstand quite often while we played music softly behind it. Essentially, it says this: first they came for the Poles, and I said nothing because I wasn't Polish. Then they came for the gypsies. I said nothing because I wasn't gypsy. They came for the Slavs. I said nothing because I wasn't Slavic. Then they came for the Jews. I said nothing because I'm not a Jew. They came for the Unionists. I wasn't in the union. I said nothing because I wasn't a unionist. And then they came for me. Well, this is what I mean when you turn the thing around and ask yourself, if the shoe is on the other foot, what would be your attitude about any of it? And would you be wallowing in privilege? No, you wouldn't, because you would have the objectivity of reality. So that's what I mean. All anyone has to do is just put the shoe on the other foot, and all questions are answered. There's nothing complicated about it.
Now, let me ask you this. Do you think there's enough done to have voices of Black people heard? Do you think there's enough maybe attempt on the side of a Black community to project and share of their voices and what's really going on and about overt racism or not?
Do I think it's enough voices heard? Well, there are voices out there. I don't know if but being heard is a whole nother thing, because to be heard, you got to have a person hearing, or a society, or a subgroup, or a group, or a part of society that's actually hearing, So to hear is one thing, to listen is another thing, to understand is another thing, and then to be moved to actually change behavior is another thing. But there are people that have always were there saying, the wrongness and the inequitable things that are going on. There's always been people saying that. So now, whether or not they're being heard, that's a whole nother question, because now that requires the hearer, and that's another question. I can say this. Use myself as an example. The only thing I don't want special treatment. I don't want special treatment from white people, brown people, green people. I don't need special anything. But don't treat me different. Don't be different. Don't treat me. I don't want the specialness, but don't treat me special in terms of negatives. Don't do that. That's all I ask. I don't want anything but civility. I don't need one extra anything but civility. That's it. And fairness. That's it. Not this much more, but not this much less. Now, that's actually not too much to ask for. So,
Very true.
and quite a few. I mean, I don't speak for all African Americans, because all African Americans are not alike. They really aren't, any more than all white people are alike, or all Chinese people are alike. Of course not. However, that's all anybody wants: Chinese, white, African American, Ethiopian, whatever, is civility. You don't have to love me, but civility, that's all. No more, but no less. And that's all people want, including African Americans and basically every human being walking around on the planet Earth. That's it. And
Very
so,
true.
yeah, that's it. So I would say, since we're talking about race in America, I'm pretty sure black people don't want anything. It's just, if you're gonna, don't strangle a guy with your hands in your pocket for 9 minutes, and he actually was cooperating and not really resisting, and then think that's okay and you're able to get away with that. Who wants that? I mean, really? So that's all. And all we want, this is important too. The police, for instance, are quick to say, don't paint us all with one brush, because there's a couple bad apples in the barrel. We're not all bad. Don't paint the police with one swish of the breath. Don't judge us all by the few. This is what they ask. Now, let's ask this of them. If we people are supposed to look at them in that manner, that means that they are supposed to look at people like me in that same manner. Don't judge me by a few bad apples that happen to be brown. You don't want to be judged by the few bad apples that are cops. Totally that way. So when you run up on a black person and you're going to make an arrest as a policeman, don't have your attitude a certain way the minute you approach me, because you're looking at me the way that you don't want me to look at the police force as a whole. Don't come up with a law of behavior that you expect for others that you're not able to obey yourself. That's what I'm saying. And I dare say it, and I will say it. This is what I mean. Don't judge, So this means this. When you get ready to run up on a black person as a cop, don't come with any baggage. That person with pure consciousness and from square one. That's it. You will not go up to an Italian and say to him with a vibe, I know you're connected to the mob. I know you've made your bones. What family you with? You're not going to do that. You're either going to arrest this man or don't arrest him. But there's a certain amount of you're not going to just come up with any perceived anything. That's all a black person wants. A cop is not going to run up to an Irish guy in a car and say, I know you're drunk because you people drink. So get out of the car. I don't even want to take your breath. He's not going to do that. If the person is drunk, yes, he will do that. And he should. And he should be treated a certain way. This is what I'm talking about. Don't come up with anything on me that you wouldn't do with others. That's it.
Thank you, Charles. Okay. Let me ask you this. So we covered a lot of ground, right? Yeah. We talked about the fairness of treatment. We talked about some of your personal stories. We talked about the privilege.
Right.
We talked about some overt racism. What haven't we talked about? Is there anything that you think I may be missing, or not, like an important topic that we should have talked about?
Well, I mean, after everything is said and done, Daniel, we could have two supposedly intelligent people talk. But in the end, it's all about, it's very simple in a way. It's just, it is really so simple that it can be elusive, is that you just treat others that you want to be treated like. That's it. No more, no less. That's it. So if everybody kind of did that, um, a lot of things would be better just because of that. And probably the way that we are to survive as not only a country, but a species, is that sooner or later, that's going to have to be the thing that's making people the code of behavior. It's going to have to be that as much as possible, even though we're human and we're going to err. But you gotta try for that at least, if nothing else. You know.
This is great.
Okay.
This is really good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Charles. I really
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.